When European settlers first arrived on the shores of what is now known as America, they encountered a land already inhabited by diverse and thriving indigenous populations. These first encounters were often marked by a mixture of curiosity and misunderstanding. Native Americans, with their ancient cultures and deep connection to the land, viewed these newcomers with a mixture of caution and, in some cases, initial hospitality. However, this period of relative peace would prove to be short-lived, as the hunger for land and resources quickly overshadowed any attempts at peaceful coexistence. The arrival of Europeans marked a turning point in the history of Native Americans. As more settlers arrived, seeking land and opportunity, pressure mounted on the ancestral territories of indigenous tribes. The stage was set for a clash of cultures, a clash that would have devastating and lasting consequences for the original inhabitants of this land. The introduction of European diseases to the Americas was nothing short of catastrophic for Native American populations. Smallpox in particular spread like wildfire, leaving a trail of death and devastation in its wake. Indigenous communities with no prior exposure to these diseases and therefore no immunity were ill-equipped to cope with the rapid spread and devastating effects of these illnesses. Imagine a sickness so swift and merciless that it could wipe out entire villages in a matter of days. This was the grim reality faced by Native Americans as diseases, often unknowingly carried by European settlers, ravaged their communities. The impact of these epidemics went far beyond the immediate loss of life. They disrupted traditional ways of life, shattered social structures, and left a lasting legacy of trauma and loss. The loss of life caused by these epidemics was staggering. Some estimates suggest that as much as 90% of the indigenous population in certain regions perished due to diseases introduced by Europeans. This demographic collapse had profound consequences, weakening the ability of Native Americans to defend their lands and cultures against the growing tide of European expansion. The introduction of disease was a tragedy of immense proportions, a silent killer that forever altered the course of Native American history. As European settlers pushed westward, driven by a relentless hunger for land, the U.S. government enacted policies to displace Native Americans from their ancestral homelands. One of the most shameful chapters in this history is the forced removal of Native American tribes from their homes in the southeastern United States to designated territories west of the Mississippi River. This brutal and inhumane policy, carried out in the 1830s, became known as the Trail of Tears. The Indian Removal Act of 1830, signed into law by President Andrew Jackson, paved the way for the forced displacement of thousands of Native Americans. The Cherokee, Creek, Seminole, Chickasaw, and Choctaw nations, known as the Five Civilized Tribes due to their adoption of European customs, were among those targeted for removal. These tribes were forcibly driven from their lands, their homes and belongings confiscated, their lives upended. The journey west was arduous and deadly. Thousands of Native Americans perished from disease, starvation, and exposure as they were forced to march hundreds of miles to unfamiliar and often inhospitable lands. The Trail of Tears stands as a stark reminder of the cruelty and injustice inflicted upon Native Americans in the name of westward expansion. It is a story of forced migration, cultural disruption, and the resilience of a people determined to survive in the face of unimaginable hardship. The forced removal of Native Americans from their lands inevitably led to conflict. The Indian Wars, a series of armed conflicts between Native American tribes and the United States government, spanned centuries and reflected the growing tensions and power imbalances between the two groups. From the early colonial period to the late 19th century, these conflicts were marked by violence, brutality, and a tragic loss of life on both sides. As European settlers continued to encroach on Native American lands, resistance was met with swift and often brutal reprisals. The U.S. Army, driven by a policy of westward expansion and often fueled by racial prejudice, engaged in campaigns to subdue and displace Native American tribes. Battles such as the Battle of Little Bighorn, where the Lakota Sioux and Cheyenne warriors, led by Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse, famously defeated General Custer and his troops, stand as testaments to the fierce resistance mounted by Native Americans. However, these victories were often short-lived. The superior firepower and resources of the U.S. government eventually took their toll. Native American tribes, facing dwindling numbers, forced removals, and the destruction of their traditional ways of life, were ultimately defeated. The Indian Wars marked a dark chapter in American history, a period of violence and displacement that left scars on the land and in the hearts of those who fought and died for their way of life. Section 5. Confined to the Shadows: Life on Reservations. As the Indian Wars drew to a close, the United States government implemented a policy of confining Native Americans to reservations. These tracts of land, often located in remote and undesirable areas, were intended to isolate Native Americans from European settlers and to assimilate them into mainstream American society. However, the reservation system, rife with corruption, neglect, and broken promises, had a devastating impact on Native American life. Life on reservations was characterized by poverty, limited economic opportunities, and a loss of traditional ways of life. Native Americans were stripped of their self-sufficiency and forced to rely on government rations, which were often inadequate and of poor quality. The government-appointed Indian agents, tasked with overseeing the reservations, often abused their power, leading to corruption and exploitation. The reservation system also had a profound impact on Native American culture and identity. Traditional languages and ceremonies were suppressed, and children were often sent to boarding schools where they were forced to abandon their cultural heritage and assimilate into white American society. The reservation system, designed to control and assimilate Native Americans, had the unintended consequence of further marginalizing and impoverishing them. Section 6. Spirits Unbroken: The Resilience of Native Americans. Despite the relentless onslaught of persecution, displacement, and cultural assimilation, Native American communities have demonstrated remarkable resilience and strength. Throughout their history, they have clung to their traditions, languages, and spiritual beliefs, passing them down through generations and keeping their cultural heritage alive in the face of adversity. From the Trail of Tears to the Wounded Knee Massacre, Native Americans have endured unimaginable hardships. Yet, they have never given up hope. They have fought for their rights, their lands, and their cultures with unwavering determination. Their stories are testaments to the enduring human spirit, the power of resistance, and the importance of preserving one's identity in the face of oppression. The resilience of Native Americans is evident in their continued efforts to revitalize their languages, preserve their cultural traditions, and fight for self-determination. Despite the many challenges they face, they have never lost sight of who they are and where they come from. Their story is one of survival, resilience, and the enduring power of the human spirit to overcome adversity. Section 7. The Fight Continues: Modern-Day Struggles. While the most brutal chapters of Native American persecution may be in the past, the legacy of historical trauma and systemic injustice continues to cast a long shadow on the present. Native American communities still face a multitude of challenges, including poverty, discrimination, health disparities, and the ongoing fight for sovereignty and self-determination. The statistics paint a stark picture of the challenges faced by many Native Americans today. They experience higher rates of poverty, unemployment, and health problems compared to other racial and ethnic groups in the United States. Access to quality health care, education, and economic opportunities remains a significant challenge in many Native American communities. Despite these challenges, Native Americans continue to raise their voices, demanding recognition, justice, and a seat at the table. They are fighting for the protection of their sacred sites, the revitalization of their languages and cultures, and the right to self-governance. Section 8. A call for recognition and justice. The time has come for a full and honest reckoning with the history of Native American persecution in the United States. It is time to acknowledge the wrongs of the past, to listen to the voices of Native American elders and leaders, and to work together to create a more just and equitable future for all. This requires a multifaceted approach, one that addresses the systemic inequalities that continue to plague Native American communities. It means investing in education, healthcare, and economic development in Indian country. It means honoring treaties and respecting the sovereignty of Native American nations. And it means supporting the efforts of Native American communities to revitalize their cultures, languages, and traditions. Above all, it requires a shift in perspective, a move away from the narratives of conquest and assimilation that have for too long dominated the telling of American history. It is time to listen to the voices of Native Americans, to learn from their histories and cultures, and to work together to build a future where all people are treated with dignity, respect, and justice. Section 9, Conclusion, Honoring the Past, Shaping the Future. The history of Native Americans is a complex and often painful one, marked by resilience, resistance, and an enduring connection to the land. From the arrival of European settlers to the present day, Native Americans have faced unimaginable hardships, yet they have never given up hope. They have fought for their rights, their cultures, and their very survival, and their stories deserve to be heard and understood by all. As we move forward, it is essential that we remember and honor the sacrifices made by those who came before us. We must acknowledge the injustices of the past and work to create a future where all people are treated with dignity and respect. The fight for justice and recognition is far from over, but by working together, we can create a brighter future for Native Americans and for all.